Thank you. Thank you so much. It's the first time I've talked about this work publicly, so bear with me a little bit. I'm going to start with a quote. Wherever a step well links brilliant Indian sun to a clear pool of water, two separate worlds are joined. In the well's stone corridors, people move between one realm and the other. The diminishing light descending the stairs conveys a sense of passage deep into the earth, moving further into darkness. Excavation is balanced with construction, one pair of opposites, in a series that includes sky and water, solid and liquid, empty and full. The experience is mesmerizing. Indeed it is. I had the opportunity to visit the Stepwells, a number of them, for the first time last summer. I harvested some video footage. I hope to share a few brief clips of that with you at the end of my paper if I have time. But in the meanwhile, I wanted to say a word or two about what got me interested in all of this. So two seemingly unrelated things happened around 2008, 2009. The first was that I became aware of the Stepwells, primarily through my colleague at the time, Paul Tazar, and Kristen Schaefer. Paul was able to visit them with another colleague at NC State, and then Kristen became extremely enthusiastic, and we all started talking about our shared enthusiasm for these things and wondering why we had never heard about them, although we all considered ourselves fairly knowledgeable, well-educated in architectural history, etc. The other thing that happened was that we had this big economic downturn that some of you might remember. And in December of 2008, Barack Obama coined the phrase shovel-ready project to indicate projects that fairly rapidly could be implemented, sometimes acts of construction of large infrastructure that could put unemployed laborers to work almost immediately. Now, while I politically supported these types of projects and these ideas, this term shovel-ready project irked me because it implied that these projects of major import and longevity, presumably, to our physical environment could be commenced almost immediately with almost no forethought, design, reverence, or imagination. So this is the context within which I started to ponder these questions and issues in the relationship of, potential relationship of infrastructure to culture and spirituality. I'm going to switch to this. In the past, globally, communities expressed great civic pride in providing clean water to be gathered for drinking, bathing, and laundering. The impressive network of Roman aqueducts and fountains, for example, used architecture's full powers to ennoble, enrich, and celebrate these basic human activities and the systems making them possible. They exceeded mere utility to express joyful gratitude and imperial grandeur, and as interpreted by Federico Fellini, even a bit of glamour and sexiness. Many municipal reservoirs of the 19th and 20th centuries in European and American cities, similarly, were places that not only accommodated infrastructural and utilitarian needs of supplying vast amounts of clean water to large urban areas, but some, such as Manhattan's Croton Distributing Reservoir, pictured here, became significant places for public promenade and social interaction. This is an image at the Easter Parade, parading by the Croton Reservoir, which was demolished soon thereafter at the end of the 19th century and replaced with New York Public Library. But prior to that, it was conceived, again, not only as a piece of public infrastructure to bring water to the city, but as a kind of promenade ground and park. People would parade along the edges of this thing, as is shown in this Currier and Ives print. Equally impressive, but far less well known, the Stepwells of Ragistan and Gujurat in Western India stand as witness to a time when water and its architectural elaboration were inextricably intertwined with the social and spiritual lives of communities. These well cisterns provided Indian villages with water for drinking and bathing, laundering, social gathering, and worship. They exemplify a system of infrastructure that epitomizes a sustainable harvesting of natural resources also imbued with cultural and spiritual significance. As one approaches most stepwells, they are hidden from view. There is a very major aha factor as you approach these things, because you don't see them coming, and then all of a sudden there is this gaping and usually very elaborately designed and carved void before you. These well structures are carved between 3 and 9 stories into the ground, creating subterranean platforms and pavilions that are covered and providing shade. One descends into their depths, experiencing their cool, shaded mystery within the body of the earth. They don't exist, as most buildings do, as objects, but only as space. They are inextricably linked to the earth, its mysteries, its depth. They are located primarily in remote villages in the arid regions of Ragistan and Gujurat, well away from heavily trafficked tourism centers, and herein perhaps lies the reason for their relative obscurity and strange absence, in large part from the literature covering the canon of world architecture. The scholarship on the stepwells and stepped ponds of this region is also sparse. The primary text in English, and the one to which this paper is most heavily indebted, is Morna Livingston's Steps to Water, The Ancient Stepwells of India, which I recommend to everyone. Also important sources are Jutta J. Neubauer's Stepwells of Gujarat and Kiri Tumenkodi's The Queen's Stepwell at Patan. If you don't speak or read Sanskrit or Hindi, you have very few options to learn about the stepwells unless you go yourself. Many of my observations in this paper are informed by these sources, but also by my firsthand experience there and my discussions with villagers and locals that I met while in India. Stepwells are stone-lined structures carved into the earth. Hundreds of these wells still dot the towns and villages of Rajasthan and Gujarat. About 3,000 were built originally, and around Delhi. The climate in these regions is hot and arid, with a few months of monsoon rains. To gain access to water during the rest of the dry year, the people of the region use stepwells to collect and hold water. In addition to acting as cisterns that hold water from the rains, the wells were dug deep enough to reach the natural aquifer on average 9 stories below the Earth's surface. Additionally, some of the wells tapped into underground natural springs. Following the end of the monsoon rains, in the fall, the stepwells were filled with water almost to their topmost tier. I visited pretty much at the end of the season, right before the monsoon rain started, so that was by design, so that I could get into and see most of them. During the course of the year, as the water table dropped, step terraces of cool stone quarried from nearby sources allowed villagers to descend deeper and deeper into the earth sufficiently to gain access to the water. By the time of the rain cycle just preceding the monsoons, the driest time of the year, villagers seeking water would need to descend up to 9 stories into the earth. At this time, the majority of the structure is finally visible and inhabitable. The various levels of the well, often festooned with spectacular architectural niches, altars, platforms, columns, corridors, and ornamentation previously submerged under the water, are now fully revealed to view. Various types of steps and ramps, as well as pulley systems, allowed for different means of access to the water and its transportation back to the surface. At given intervals, platform areas stabilize the slope of the packed earth behind the stone and also provide visitors a place of rest and opportunities to gather. These are partially covered shaded areas within these platforms, often containing small temples or altars to various gods and goddesses related to the religious customs or specific gods of the local village, temple, or the patron of the well. The religious affiliation and related ornament is unique to each well and the region generally, and as such reflects and serves as memorial to centuries-old customs of living, ritual, and worship. First and foremost, however, wells were, of course, utilitarian. They linked people to water in a region where this was not easy to do. They were created out of necessity, but their engineering and architecture enabled a harmonious and quite ingenious integration of the climactically extreme realities of this geographic region, the needs of local peoples, and the cultural and religious beliefs and practices these communities espoused. The increasing scarcity of water in northwestern India today and ongoing cultural associations and religious beliefs cause many of the stepwells to continue to be used. Unfortunately, they are not uniformly preserved and are therefore currently underutilized, both as the environmental and cultural resources they still are and could be. The wells are, by their very nature and design, urban gathering spaces. They were designed for the community as gifts to villages from wealthy families or rulers, often by women or queens, as water was associated with the feminine. The stepwells were a center of social life for centuries for men, but particularly for women, who were generally responsible for laundering and hauling water from the well to the home. The wells were the sole place, in fact, that women could acceptably gather to socialize outside the home without the accompaniment of their husbands or mothers-in-law. It is part of Hindu doctrine that adherents bathe daily, believing that clean thoughts come from physical cleansing. The wells, as places for bathing, are part of a larger belief system that also includes India's 7 sacred rivers. Indeed, as Morna Livingston in her book relates, it is common for Hindus to pray upon entering the water. While water and places for bathing all hold a degree of spiritual significance, it is important to distinguish here between stepped ponds, such as Surya Kund, which you've seen here at Madeira, always adjacent to temples, that are fully open to the sky, rectangular or square-shaped, and the step wells, typically located further away from the temples, that are long and thin, partially covered by various terraces and pavilions, and considered, generally speaking, more secular. Step ponds next to temples were strictly used for bathing and religious ritual. More profane uses of wells, such as watering of animals and laundering, took place only in the step wells, which nonetheless were lined with altars and used as places, daily places of prayer and worship. Both stepped ponds and step wells, however, were considered tirthas. I hope that's the proper pronunciation. A term which connotes the threshold between earth and heaven, but also translates as watering hole. Tirthas were pilgrimage destinations and were thought to be interconnected into one integrated realm that included all rivers, temples, stepwells, and pilgrimage sites. In addition to daily prayers and bathing rituals, stepwells were also sites of religious festivals and ceremonies. On my visit to the Panamia stepwell, I encountered a villager who urged me, this was in mid-July, urged me to come back in a month. Of course, I was getting on a plane in 4 days, unfortunately, to be at the Panamia stepwell for the celebration of the birth of Krishna, because apparently it is a very big deal, and the wells just become filled with people singing and dancing and celebrating. So clearly, although some of the wells are no longer functioning as wells, they very much still function in their original symbolic and cultural ways in many of the different locations. Milo Beach, who wrote a foreword to Morna Livingston's book, said that, noted that as distinctive as these buildings are, they are also among the least known or visited monuments in India, and I found that to be true visiting them. There were usually not a lot of people there, and most of the tourists were Indian, not American or European. When the British came into India in the 19th century, they decommissioned most of the wells, literally placing locked grates over them to prevent access, and replaced them with a piped water supply. They were apparently, by European standards, horrified by what they saw as the unsanitary conditions. According to the Archaeological Survey of India, Henry Cousins of that organization at the time reported on seeing the stepwell at Vadvan saying that, quote, the water in it was foul beyond description and the stench within was very great, yet people go there and bathe and wash their clothes, end quote. Though many of the wells have disappeared or are in various states of ruin, there are a number that are virtually intact, open for visitation, and capable of being preserved as cultural and ecological resources. Large and particularly ornate wells, such as the Queen Stepwell at Patan, Rani Ki Vav, and Adalaj near Ahmedabad, are supervised and subject to ongoing efforts of preservation and conservation by the Archaeological Survey of India. However, the vast majority of more minor stepwells continue to be pillaged for stone or ornament or used as dumping places for garbage and generally allowed to continually degrade. There have been recent signs that the collective value of the wells to serve as cisterns in urban areas, particularly around Delhi, is being used to champion their preservation and rehabilitation. In a 2002 article in the Times of India, a former director of the Archaeological Survey of India was quoted as saying, quote, these ancient structures hold the key to solving today's water crisis. If the rain is properly harnessed, there should be no problem here. This is an active stepwell that was rehabilitated in the heart of Delhi. We had a very hard time finding it. It is embedded in the middle of a block, and at the time it was being used as a very refreshing swimming pool for the local youth. Since this time, numerous stepwells in and around Delhi and some in Jaipur have been cleaned and rehabilitated so that they can once again become sources of sustainable and clean water for the local community and serve as well as places of cultural significance and social gathering. However, it is unclear whether these efforts that are most prevalent in Delhi will spread to the more rural areas of Ragistan and Gujurat. As was observed in Morna Livingston's book, preservation is a luxury allowed to a culture secure in its achievements without a critical mass of unmet public needs. In conclusion, the stepwells of India embody a wealth of inspirational lessons regarding Indian cultural history and display the many ways that architecture is capable of enabling and honoring the relationship between precious natural resources and human life. It is tempting to think about ways that contemporary societies can learn from and implement these elegant strategies for sustainably harnessing natural resources in ways that contribute to the cultural and social vitality of communities. While it is unlikely to imagine public wells such as these replacing municipal piped water supply to homes and other buildings in American cities, it is not so far-fetched to imagine other analogous intersections of infrastructural imperative and social purpose. In New Orleans, for example, we are quite literally awash in numerous conversations and proposals concerning water management. After a century of resisting our low-lying adjacency to bayous, swamps, and easily flooded terrain by force of engineering, levees, storm drainage systems, pumping stations, and the like, many of the more enlightened proposals currently being discussed contemplate making place in the urban terrain for flooded and floodable areas. These areas of water retention to relieve the damaging cycle of flood mitigation through pumping, land subsidence, and an ever-shrinking ground can in turn be imagined as amenities to citizens as parks, community gardens, and natural preserves. Other cities and places might spawn other place, climate, and environmentally specific intersections of utility and delight. Perhaps a more widespread knowledge of the stepwells, among other great examples, might spur us to remember the not-too-distant past, when art and culture were seen as integral and essential components of all mediations between ourselves and our environments, rather than as superfluous overlays of style or ornamentation on a select few monuments. So I'm gonna, if I have 2 minutes left, I'm gonna show you a brief clip that is just a bit of a collage of some of the stepwell. Why did it go away? good, it's back. My research assistants. This is the Sun Temple at Modera and the Suryakund Stepwell right next to it. This is the Panamina Stepwell in Jaipur. That's it.
Very nice.
Thank you.